I'm Charlotte, I'm 25. My family is well known for the type of business we run. Most people will consider it retail or fashion. But still, it's just a business run like any other. Supply and demand was my father's motto. They demand it, we supply it, he often said. So it was no surprise that, during the economic downturn, our business began to falter. After all, no one was going out to the malls or shopping centers anymore. This was a very scary time for my family. And though we didn't flaunt our wealth like most in our position, it was widely known that my father was rich and powerful in the industry. My father was a no-nonsense type of guy, and he taught my mother and me to be the same. When the going got tough, you know the rest. It was now time for us to pull up by our bootstraps and put our heads together and reinvent ourselves, so to speak. My father did have an unorthodox approach to business, but in the end, it always turned out to be successful. Call it skill or call it dumb luck. He eventually ended up on top. But during this uncertain time, I was also planning for my wedding with the man I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, Max. Max and I grew up together. Our parents were close friends, almost family. His dad and my dad were business partners up until a decade ago when the company they started together went in different directions and they parted ways. But it was always amicable and oftentimes prosperous for each other. This time, however, it seemed my father was going down the drain alone, with no life raft. Even though my dad and Uncle Ron, Max's dad, were experiencing very different business circumstances, it didn't seem to hinder the planning for me and Max's nuptials. So that was a relief. Max and I had plenty discussions, over the course of our courtship, our roles in our family businesses and our responsibilities to each other. And we both agreed, no matter what, we would choose each other over everything. Our love for each other took precedence. His success was my success, and his failure was my failure, and vice versa. This is what kept our relationship strong after all this time together. But of course it was easier said than done since neither of us encountered any real hardships in our lives. We both received the most prestigious education and was expected to supersede our father's accomplishments. All of their money and effort was poured into us to secure our futures. And together, it was predicted we'd become a powerhouse. The first sign of trouble was the day my mother and soon-to-be mother-in-law, Aunt Gertie, accompanied me to try on wedding dresses. It was supposed to be a happy time, a much-needed reprieve from the rigors of failing businesses and restructuring of empires. Instead, it was becoming a nightmare. It all started when Aunt Gertie shook her head every dress I tried on. Not because she didn't like it, more because she kept referring to them as cheap. This is where I should point out that Aunt Gertie was always known to be materialistic and shallow. But she was rich, so it didn't seem to be unwarranted. Still, because she knew the economic downturn of my family, her attitude appeared more insensitive than anything. "Where do you think you're going in that dress?" She would drawl out her words and wave her hand with an air of indifference. "You're not going to a burlesque show, are you?" "Humph, take it away." Then she'd give a quick flick of the hand and the attendant would whisk it away. Trying to lighten the mood, my mother would say, "I thought it was beautiful. But anything you wear will look gorgeous on you. Are you trying to advertise to everyone that you're poor?" Aunt Gertie would come back swinging hard. Yeah. Did I mention she could be uncouth and unrefined and quite bullheaded at times? "I liked that dress," I would say. But my words were quickly dismissed. The attendant would look to Aunt Gertie and ask, "Are there any more you'd like to look at?" I waved my hand in front of her face. "Hey! I'm the one getting married. Shouldn't you be asking me that?" Aunt Gertie butt in, "That'll be all for today." Then she got up and walked out. My mother and I looked at each other. What the heck, then we followed her out of the shop. Later that day, when Max and I met for dinner, I told him what happened. He laughed about it and said, "You know Gertrude. Don't let her get under your skin." He was right. It was no secret how she was. So I let his words put me at ease and didn't think much about it again. But each time we went to finalize the menu or cake or anything, Aunt Gertie was the same. She rejected everything. It was beginning to seem as if she didn't want the wedding to go on. At this rate, we'd have to push the date back if we didn't come to some consensus and decide. Meanwhile, my father and I worked tirelessly on the company to stop the bleeding. Then we had a breakthrough. For the first time in months, we were finally starting to see a drastic turnaround. We were finally back in the black and the numbers were promising. Thanks to some new innovative ideas and some risky changes, the business was back where it was before the economy's downward spiral. Of course, my father was cautiously optimistic and wanted to keep this on the hush, at least until a couple of quarter earning reports to see if this new plan was a viable one or just a fluke. I agreed, so we continued with the status quo and maintained our frugal living until we were sure our plan worked or if it needed more tweaking here and there. However, my family's celebratory moment was short-lived. We were summoned by the in-laws. This wasn't a strange occurrence, our families met regularly and quite enjoyed each other's company. But for some reason, it felt different. There seemed to be a death pall hanging over the festivities. We all felt it, but couldn't quite put our finger on it. Even Max seemed to be acting strangely, which was a first. Where he'd usually be the one to break the ice and crack silly jokes that kept us laughing all night, he was stiff. It was like he didn't want to be there. Frankly, he looked uncomfortable and ready to bolt. Uncle Ron was jovial enough, but it seemed strained. It was like he was forcing himself to be cordial. But Aunt Gertie, she was a different case. She was impatient and cold. It was as if she wanted to forego the pleasantries and get straight to the point. But what point? What was happening? Finally my father said, "What's going on? Why did you call us here?" Uncle Ron hemmed and hawed while Max shifted in his seat uncomfortably. Aunt Gertie pulled out a folder and shoved it towards me. "Here, sign this." My father snatched it from me and stared down at it. "What's this?" "It's a prenuptial agreement. Don't act surprised." "You should have known this was coming," Aunt Gertie said coolly. "Wait, what?" I was confused. Max and I discussed this. "We're not doing this." We both agreed. "If you don't sign it, there will be no wedding," Aunt Gertie said. "Besides, the Wilkes daughter would probably be a much better match for our Maxie anyway." There. She said it. The truth was finally coming out. Now looking back, all of her stall tactics with the wedding planner was beginning to take focus. She was trying to sabotage or even stop the wedding from happening. "How dare you?" my father yelled. "We have an agreement." My mother chimed in, which was rare. She was usually quiet and accommodating. But this seemed to get her hackles up. "This is between the kids. We shouldn't be intruding like this, Gert. Max is my business. If you think I'm going to allow him to marry your poor daughter with no protection, you can think again. You can't expect us to keep to our original agreement. Your circumstances have changed drastically and this is for his protection," Aunt Gertie said. "Max? What about you? Do you feel this way?" I asked. "Do you want me to sign this agreement? What's the big deal?" "If you're not after his money then you'll sign it," Uncle Ron said. I'll be honest, this coming from him was shocking. I've known him all of my life and I never heard him so much as mention money before. This subject sounded strange coming off his tongue. "You guys deal with it," Max finally said, then got up and walked from the room, leaving all of us to squabble about what was right or wrong. My dad looked at his age-old friend. He looked disappointed enough to cry. But he stayed strong. "After all these years your true colors have finally come out. Let's go, honey." As we made our way to the door, Uncle Ron called out. "Wait. You're right. We should have never asked Charlotte to do this. I should have never let it get this far. Forget about the whole thing. I hope we can put this behind us, for old time's sake." My father looked at his old friend for a long moment, made an odd grunting sound that came from the back of his throat, which could have been an agreement or not, then left the house. But just like that, after several more days of fighting, the wedding planning was back on. But I wasn't so sure if I wanted to continue. A lot was revealed in the last week. Things I never considered before. I don't know when it all started, maybe from the womb, who knows. But it was always a given that Max and I would end up together. And it was something neither of us resisted. I know my feelings for him was genuine. It wasn't like fireworks going off in my head or anything like that when I thought of him though. Max was more like a steady rocking back and forth on a hammock with a cool, tropical breeze. He was comfortable, soothing. Max came to see me and said we needed to talk. He looked serious. I followed him outside, my stomach was in knots. "Do you still want to go through with this?" he asked. He was stoic, his eyes searching mine. I held my head down and averted his stare. If I looked in his eyes, would I see rejection? Longing? Could I handle what I saw? We've always discussed all things. There was never a secret between us. "Tell me, what do you want to do?" I finally asked him. "Can I be honest?" he asked. "Please do." "I don't know what I want to do. Before the other night, I always thought there was no doubt, but now, I'm honestly not sure." That was fair, I thought. I was feeling much the same way, but hadn't voiced it out loud. Yet where Max was upfront and honest about his feelings like his mother Aunt Gertie, I was like my mother, holding my emotions at bay while I silently examined them in private. "Do you want to call off the wedding?" I managed to say the words, but they were bitter on my tongue. I was quite frankly feeling sick to my stomach. "Let's not be too hasty. Give me a week to think about it." "Can you do that for me?" he asked. I nodded. Yes. My mother and Aunt Gertie hadn't spoken since that night. But my mother heard through the grapevine that Aunt Gertie was pressuring Max to call off our wedding and to seriously consider Annette Wilkes as a prospective bride. Although her family didn't have as much money as mine, she did consider them to be stable in their business practices. What she didn't know, which was something my family kept secret, was that our business was not only fully recovered but was making leaps and bounds towards a success even we hadn't known. My father and I had quite literally resurrected the company, and with the expansions and new concepts implemented, we were bigger and more successful than we'd ever been before. The part that was most heartbreaking though, was our family never disagreed on anything. And money was a vulgar nuisance that was never discussed between us. Yet it was the thing that finally broke the ties that bound us, in the end. More for my Aunt Gertie's greed than anything else. But, when Max and I decided to continue with the wedding, as planned, I tried to put all of this ugliness behind me. All of the preparations were made. I couldn't wait for him to see my dress. Even his mother liked it and gave her approval. But from that night of our family's disagreement onward, Aunt Gertie remained a bit standoffish, yet cordial. It had also been rumored that she attempted to set up a blind date for Max and Annette, hoping for a love connection, even up until a few days before the wedding. Max assured me he was not interested in Annette. He likened her to an annoying baby sister, if anything. He had made up his mind. He joked how his mother threatened to cut him off if he proceeded with the wedding and married me. He'd tease how he was going to be a penniless beggar and I would have to take care of him from now on. Of course I agreed. Soon, our easy banter was back on track and we spent the last few nights laughing and chatting like old times. Max kissed me on the forehead on the night before our wedding. He stared at me for a long time. It made me feel uneasy. It was like he was searching my soul again. "Get some rest. We have a big day ahead of us tomorrow." I leaned into his kiss and hugged him around his waist. This familiar gesture felt strange to me. Tomorrow. What will life be like for me after tomorrow? Tomorrow was here. The big day. My wedding day. Today, I was going to marry my childhood best friend. My life partner. For my sake, my mother called Aunt Gertie, if for nothing else, to clear the air between them so the festivities wouldn't be hampered by their awkwardness while among the guests. As usual, Aunt Gertie was cold and curt and refusing to acknowledge she did anything wrong to strain their lifelong friendship. And also as usual, my mother allowed her friend to pretend nothing happened. Our fathers were back to their chummy selves, talking shop and congratulating each other for only God knows what. In truth, I think they started drinking early. The guests were here, presents in hand. Everyone was ready, even I was ready, waiting, anxiously waiting for the wedding march to begin and my father to walk me down the aisle. 5 minutes passed. I retouched my makeup. 10 minutes passed. The guests started rumbling and whispering amongst themselves. After 15 minutes, the pastor looked a little perturbed, though he tried not to show it. 20 minutes went by, then everyone started looking at their watches. I could see his best man answer his cell phone, then he looked around. He went to Uncle Ron and they left out of the hall and into the vestibule. Then my father joined in the conversation. He looked pissed. Aunt Gertie looked annoyed. After all, she had her reputation to uphold. In her mind, he was making her look bad. My mom tried to keep a pleasant expression, more for my sake. But her eyebrows were slightly furrowed from worry. It was obvious. That's when my heart began to beat loudly in my chest. I was being left at the altar. He was not coming. Did he get cold feet? Did he decide at the last moment he wasn't going to go through with it? Is today the tomorrow I was dreading? This was the beginning of the rest of my life, always being known for the woman whose fiancé left her at the altar. I know Aunt Gertie threatened to disown him and cut him off if he decided to marry me, especially since I refused to sign the prenuptial agreement, but was this his way of caving into her demands? I wanted to kick myself for not doing it. What was so hard about it? It's not like it mattered in the end. If anything, it would have protected me more than him anyway. As it stood right now, my family was 3 times richer than his. Was it my pride that interfered in my happily ever after? Did he want to be with Annette, after all? Uncle Ron picked up the microphone and cleared his throat. His face was red with anger. Embarrassment, I can't tell which. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and family. There won't be a wedding today. Loud whispers echoed through the church. He continued on, to make it up to you, I ask you to retreat to the reception hall. We'll turn this into a party. And of course, there's an open bar. My parents tried to convince me to go home with them, but I refused. Uncle Ron could barely look at me and Aunt Gertie genuinely looked remorseful. But I tried to conceal whatever was going on inside my mind and made my rounds through the crowd. I received a lot of, I'm so sorry this happened to you, you're so brave when I would be locked in a room crying my eyes out, you know, the regular sympathy, not sympathy comments. But though this turn of events stung, I still believed in Max. When we parted last night, I got an inkling that something was bothering him, but not in a million years did I think it would come to this. After a few rounds of talking with guests and ensuring everyone I was okay, I finally found a corner to sit in and think. As I was drowning in my thoughts, I was startled by a strong pair of hands grabbing me and pulling me out the door. I looked up to see Max. He was wearing his tuxedo. He had dressed for the wedding. But why had he stood me up? What happened? What's going on? I asked as he was dragging me out of the reception and towards his car. He stuffed my voluminous dress in the front seat and trotted to the driver's side. He reached over and grabbed my seatbelt and quickly gave me a peck on the mouth before he snapped it in place. This is our life, this is our wedding day. Let's do it the way we want to, he said. He made a quick U-turn and sped down the street and onto the highway. Where are we going? They're going to be worried about us. I asked. But still, I felt exhilarated. I was not abandoned as I initially thought. When he asked me to wait for him, I had no idea what he was planning. I should have been angry, but I wasn't. After all we've been through the last couple of months, I know you acquiesced to my mother. This is not your wedding, but hers. So, we're going to do it our way. Our parents are not us and we're not them. If they want to cut us off, so be it. Do you think we should do this? I mean, they're going to be so angry, I said. What are they going to do, cut us off? Fine, let them have more children in their old age to take over their companies for them, he said, then looked over to me teasingly. Are you ready to be poor? Can we really have the wedding I always dreamed of? I asked, thrilled. Name it. Destination, Santorini. I said loudly. Santorini it is. After this, then we can be poor, I said, and we both laughed as we went to get our passports and head to the airport. When we returned from our honeymoon, our parents scolded us for hours for embarrassing them in front of their family and friends, then for being worried because they had no idea what happened to us. Even Aunt Gertie cried tears of joy. She slapped Max, then hugged him and pulled me into the hug. Earlier my father revealed to his old friends what he and I had been doing for the past year to restore his business. He disclosed that his company was more successful than ever, making profits beyond measure. At this, Aunt Gertie was pleased that her little scheme didn't work. She believed that now Max would have access to limitless capital to aid in their now failing business. It was a fact Uncle Ron chose to keep from her up until now, more due to his pride than anything. Good, good, Aunt Gertie kept saying. What's yours is ours and what's ours is yours. Right? This marriage is the perfect merger. This is great. Now we can bail out our company since we're one family, one empire. No. Because you insisted on it, last night Charlotte and I decided to each sign a prenuptial agreement. What's mine is mine and what's hers is hers. Isn't that what you wanted, Mother? Max said this with a slight hint of smug arrogance. But, Aunt Gertie looked ready to faint. We'll just have to pull up by our bootstraps, Max said coolly. We'll be making some necessary cuts, and I think Mom's allowance will be a great start, don't you think so, Dad? Don't you think that's a bit harsh, son? Uncle Ron stumbled out. I learned a lot from my father-in-law, Max said. There's merit in being a little frugal once in a while. Oh, I started the downsizing process, starting with your home. It's already been sold. Here's the keys and address to your new house. What? Where are you staying? Aunt Gertie asked. She was flustered and babbling her words. My wife agreed to take care of me until we can manage to get our company out of the red. Max looked to me and smiled. I smiled back and nodded. Yes, Max and I will be handling things from this point on. You guys are now able to relax and, well, retire if you wish. We got it from here, I added my 2 cents. Max grabbed my hand and we left our parents, to hopefully, rekindle their fragile relationship as Max and I began the new chapter in our lives together.
Thanks for listening to my story. Come back for more stories and help our channel grow. Bye.